Our big focus tonight, the Air India Express Boeing 737-800 aircraft that fell into a gorge at Kozhikode Airport in Kerala landed more than 1 kilometre down the length of the runway in windy and rainy conditions. Now, sources in the aviation regulator, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation or DGCA, which is leading the probe into the accident, has confirmed that this is now a key focus of their investigation, and they are looking into why the plane touched down 1 kilometre into the runway and whether the remaining length of the runway was in fact sufficient for the aircraft to have stopped safely. Vishnu Shom joining us with the latest on that. Vishnu, just how would this have impacted the landing? The runway surface would have been particularly wet at a time when there was so much rainfall. What do we know at this point?
Well, I think the big factor over here that investigators 9 a real concern, because if you've got a wind speed of 16 odd kilometers per hour, which is actually pushing the aircraft down the length of the runway, then there's a serious concern on whether or not the aircraft will be able to land within the prescribed distance of the runway. What we've also been able to confirm from sources within the Directorate General of Civil Aviation is that this aircraft, on its second attempt at landing, landed more than a kilometre, in fact 1,080 meters approximately, down the length of the runway. Now, in that situation where you've landed outside the ideal zone for landing, you've got a tailwind which is essentially very close to the limits of what the aircraft should be landing in. With that tailwind, a wet surface, and then the need to brake very fast to try and ensure you stop the aircraft means that you're potentially in trouble. Which raises the larger question, why in a situation like this, despite the presence of adequate fuel on board the aircraft, did the pilot not choose to actually go around, in other words, take off once again, lift off once again, and fly to an alternate airport? Because there was enough fuel for that. Kochi Airport, not very far away. Kannur Airport, another option which was there. Every flight has diversion to the airports. Why exactly did it pan out this way when the plane went down a gorge, it crashed up after that, so many people lost it.
All right, Vishnu, thanks very much indeed for joining us with all of those details. Well, 18 people are now dead in that Kozhikode Airport tragedy. The Civil Aviation Minister confirming that number today as he visited the crash site and announced a 10 lakh rupee compensation for the families of those who've been killed. The Kerala government has announced a matching amount in compensation. The pilot in command, Captain Deepak Sate, and his co-pilot Akhilesh Kumar were among those killed on board. And a day after IX 1344 skidded off the runway and fell into that 35-feet valley before splitting in two, there are clearly more questions than answers.
The remains of the Air India Express plane, which had 190 people on board, including 10 children, after it slid down the tabletop runway at the Kozhikode International Airport into a 36-feet gorge. 18 people have died, including 2 pilots. One of them a seasoned ex-Air Force fighter pilot.
The captain had more than 10,000 hours of flying experience. He had landed on this very airfield, I think, as many as 27 times.
At this point, there are more questions than answers. Why did the pilot not divert to an alternate airport? Was there enough fuel on board to attempt an alternate landing? Why did the aircraft touch down 1 kilometre down the length of the runway? As sources in the regular Directorate General of Civil Aviation have told NDTV.
I myself have asked those questions. I asked my colleague, the CMD of Air India. I've asked how much fuel did he have? I have an answer. There was fuel. The issue is, let us await the findings of the investigation.
A survivor of the Air India Express flight crash in Kerala today recalled the anguish of fellow passengers hours after the accident.
पूरा हम जो ओपन दिख रहे ओपन स्पेस हो गया पूरा ओपन आ गया सब लोग रो रहे सब लोग मुश्किल हुआ था उसी टाइम में कोई बोला 2 पायलट मर गया, 2 औरत मर गया, लेकिन अभी फोटो पेपर आएगा, न्यूज़पेपर में पढ़ रहे हैं अभी ये 17-18 आदमी लोग मर गया बोल रहे हैं.
Most of the people were returning to their loved ones in very difficult circumstances, whether it be loss of jobs, visa expiry, or just the sheer vulnerability of age in COVID times. 149 people were admitted to different hospitals in Malappuram and Kozhikode. But amid all this horror, there were heroes, some in uniform, some without. Like this group of friends who lived near the airport and helped rescue dozens of people, escorting them even in ambulances and their own vehicles.
We started the rescue and we have taken 6 people in that ambulance. After that there is no vehicle. So we just informed through WhatsApp and whoever is in the phone, we requested to take their car to here, this area. Then we have started to taken to hospital. Myself, I am used my car and taken 2 people to the hospital.
Actually, मैं अंदर खड़ा था तो देख रहा है एक बच्चा नीचे है, उसका ऊपर सब फ्लाइट का क्रैश करने के सब ऊपर है, वो मैं खड़ा गया तो नहीं देख रहे हैं, मैं उसका हाथ बस देख रहे हैं, बाकी सब बंद रहता है, तो वो उसका बच्चा में ले लिए एम्बुलेंस करता है.
This is COVID times. It's a pandemic, but this was an emergency situation. Didn't you all even worry or think about it, or were there no thoughts?
See, that time we are not thinking about COVID. We are primary motive rescue case only.
Kerala Health Minister has asked all people part of rescue efforts to go into self-quarantine, and they will be tested for COVID-19. With camera person SP Babu, Sneha Koshi for NDTV.
All right, we're being joined right now by Eugene Yusuf, who is one of the survivors of that plane crash in the Kozhikode airport. Eugene Yusuf, thank you so much for speaking with NDTV at this time. Now, this was a repatriation aircraft, part of the Vande Bharat mission. Tell us the circumstances that put you on this flight. What made it imperative for you to travel at this time?
Hi, thank you so much. Actually, I was in my visit visa, and I lost my job a few months before, and I joined a new company, and they were supposed to give the employment visa, but due to the corona COVID problems, they couldn't make my visa. So I have to exit before August 10th, actually. So that was the reason I took the flight on 7th, yesterday.
Right, and describe to us what happened in those fateful moments. What did you experience? Did the pilots of the aircraft communicate with you at all as the landing was happening? Tell us what happened in those moments.
Actually, we got a message from pilot 45 minutes before landing, before crashing, I would say, that we are going to land in Calicut. So it was a happy moment that we are happy that we are going to land in a couple of minutes after. So we are waiting for that. And from that moment onward, there was no messages. After like 15 to 20 minutes, there was no messages, nothing. And usually there will be a message that they will be announcing the temperature, they're announcing the local time. Nothing was there.
Yeah.
And also we got a last message from pilot, Calicut landing. He was not completing his message. He just said Calicut land, and he couldn't complete his message actually, and his voice was not completed. And after 15 to 20 minutes, the flight got landed, and at the landing time we were happy, like the flight got landed, but the happiness doesn't long for long time.
Right.
Just for a few seconds, just landed and it got crashed. Everything was in few seconds, and all the passengers, they were out of mind were blank at the time.
So where were you in terms of the aircraft? Were you seated at the back? Did you in fact sustain any injuries? And what went through your mind at the time?
At the time, I was seeing in my eyes what is happening in front of me, and I was in the last seat. I would say I was in 21B. My seat number was 21B. And I was seeing what is happening in front of me. Once the flight got hit in the wall and got crashes, I was seeing the people, the passengers, they are like flying, and all the carriers are coming out, and the people are screaming, they are shouting, and I was trying to help my co-passengers who were sitting behind me. I tried to pull out their seatbelt, and also I tried to help their children. And after that, I went outside to see what is the situation. And I got a small gap. I went out and I stand in the aircraft. Like for 20 minutes, I stand in the aircraft, and I shouted to get the attention of the people, those who are in the rescue operation. At last, the CRPF people, they came after 50 to 20 minutes. They came inside the aircraft and they removed all the stuff. They were like they were blocking our way. So they removed that and they tried to help us. And after removing all that, we came out from the aircraft.
So tell us at this point, Eugene, you're actually now in quarantine because everyone on this aircraft has been quarantined until they're tested for coronavirus. Is that clear? And you also, you've lost all your luggage as well, naturally, in this crash.
Yes, of course. I lost everything, and I went to hospital with a small kid. I went into the hospital with a small kid. She was injured in her leg, so I took her to the hospital, and I met one staff there, and I asked her to take care of her. And my friends were there with my car, so I took the car and I drive myself to home. So I didn't stand in the hospital so long. I just spent few minutes, like not more than 5 minutes. I was just in the hospital in 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, I left the hospital because it's not safe to stay there. After all, we are coming from outside.
Right. So this is clearly a difficult time for you, and we can't thank you enough for taking the time out to speak to us about what must have been a very, very traumatic event indeed. Eugene, thank you very much for sharing your story, and you've been very fortunate, perhaps more than many other people on that flight. But thank you very much indeed for speaking with NDTV.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, we're also joined at this point by Satya Pradhan, the DG of the National Disaster Response Force, or NDRF. Captain Amit Singh, aviation expert, is also with us. Satya Pradhan ji, if I can begin with you. You've actually gone on record to say things could have been far worse had the aircraft in fact caught fire.
Well, that's correct. I must again repeat that I'm not an aviation expert, but normally these accidents end up in fire, and that could have been very difficult because, as I've been saying, NDRF came in later, but it is the local volunteers and local people and the CISF, etc., who took out all the passengers and escorted them out, and that operation could not have been done had the plane caught fire. So obviously this is a saving grace, or God's grace, however we may call it. But I think that is a saving grace, yes, certainly.
All right. We are also joined on the phone line right now by V. Muralidharan, MOS of External Affairs. And Mr. Muralidharan was at the crash site today, so he can give us first-hand information. Thank you very much for speaking with NDTV, Mr. Muralidharan. What is it that you can share at this point? DGCA sources indicating at this time that the plane seems to have actually progressed a kilometre down the runway, and perhaps when it touched down was at a point much further than what the normal touchdown point would have been. So is this now a key focus of the probe going ahead? Because there's been so much talk also of the challenging circumstances of landing on what is being described as a tabletop runway. So what can you tell us about all of this?
So I'm aware that there was a heavy rain there, and in the midst of the heavy rain, the pilot had to land. At what point the actual landing took place, and whether it was beyond the halfway mark, all these things will be known once the inquiry that has been set up by the DGCA that is done, and then we get the information on that.
Right, but Mr. Muralidharan, can you tell us at this point that was there an issue with the tabletop runway, as some people are pointing out at this point, that there was an earlier report that talked about certain problems with this particular runway?
No, see, the tabletop runways are there. It has been a tabletop runway since its inception, and the aircrafts have been landing there. The same pilot has landed in this airport 27 times. So, nothing new was there yesterday.
And yet there was tragedy, Mr. Muralidharan. We also heard the Civil Aviation Minister in his press conference talk about how there was enough fuel in the aircraft. So had there been a diversionary landing, had the plane chosen to go to a nearby airport, Kannur or Kochi, it had enough fuel to do so. So why would it try and land under what appear to be exceptionally difficult circumstances?
See, perhaps you might have heard the Civil Aviation Minister saying that the pilot who was commanding the flight yesterday is a person who has more than 10,000 hours of flying hours to his credit. And he has commanded the aircraft for more than 6,000 hours. So I won't be able to guess what made him land and why he didn't divert it to some other airport. This is to find out all these issues that the inquiry has been instituted by the Civil Aviation. So once the inquiry report comes, we will get all the details of that.
All right, Mr. Muralidharan, thanks very much indeed for speaking with NDTV. Let me take this across to Captain Amit Singh, who's an aviation expert. Lots of questions being thrown up about earlier reports that talked about safety issues within the airport and so on. Will all of this now be taken into consideration by the DGCA as it probes this incident?
I lost you on that.
Captain Singh, I'm asking you really about, what the focus of the probe going ahead from here is going to be.
Well, the main idea of an investigation is to find out the reasons. So we know what happened, but we want to know why it happened and how can we prevent it from happening again.
Yeah.
So those are the main reasons, not to apportion blame to anybody. What I hear, 27 landings, 10,000 hours, there's fuel, that should not be taken into account, or that should not, those sources should not be trusted, because DGCA is not in the picture. Investigation is being carried out by the Aircraft Accident Bureau,
right,
which reports to, of course, the ministry. So those are separate issues. The main issue here is a systemic failure of aviation safety, because safety is not primarily understood by the policymakers.
But would you agree, Mr. Singh, that there are questions at this point about why, if it had enough fuel, did it not think of landing elsewhere? Was there in fact enough fuel on board to attempt an alternate landing? And the Civil Aviation Minister speaking today seems to have indicated that yes, indeed, there was. Why did it in fact land a kilometre down the runway? Are all of these, in your mind, questions that need to be asked?
Yes, at this moment, there are only questions and no answers.
Right, right. All right,
so,
thanks. Yes. Okay, we leave it at that now. We are rather hard-pressed for time, but thank you very much indeed, both of you, for joining us on the show.